Welcome to Fate, Luck and Choice. I'm Adrian Saville, Professor in Economics, Finance and Strategy at GIBS, with my good friend, colleague, Nick Binedell. It's great to be with you, Nick, in a conversation. This time last year, we were talking about go see, go Southeast Asia, get the soil between your toes. You know, all well and good sitting here talking about places, but go visit. And by wonderful coincidence, December, January of 25-26, we didn't go see, we went tangoing. We were each in Latin America. I happened to be in Brazil, Chile, Mexico, Peru, Costa Rica, Guatemala. It might be easier to say where I wasn't. And you spent good time in Argentina.
Yeah, it was my third visit. I remember years ago when I went first, I got back, I thought, wow, if South Africa didn't exist, that's where I would go, because it's got a lot of similarities. But I spent 3 weeks traveling around Argentina, mainly in Buenos Aires. And of course, we all know them for the rugby. We know them for fantastic beef. But it was interesting to really get a bit of a better feel.
So what do we not know them for? What are the things that you saw?
Well, let me add, we also know them for the turbulence.
Yeah.
And the generals and the coups and Evita and Peronism and Millet now. But yeah, I don't know if we know them for being they were once the fifth biggest economy in the world, 100 years ago or so. So I think we don't know them for huge economic success, but it's a pretty interesting, sophisticated society and economy. And the big takeaway for me, and I'd love to hear about these places you went to, is that South Africa and Argentina share a feature, which is they had a massive boom after the First World War, beef and wheat to Europe, and it made them a fortune. And so if you go to Buenos Aires, their buildings are all Italian, French, magnificent design, built then when they had the money.
Yeah.
And now they've just building tall skyscrapers, but it's a bit run down, it's a bit genteel, let's say. But we had the same. We had the 50s, 60s and 70s when South Africa was growing very fast, building infrastructure, and we had our boom. And so what's similar is we now both spent the boom, and the question is, well, now what do we do? And in that sense, it was a very interesting comparison for me. What did you find in the multiple countries you went to?
Well, you know, Nick, first to perhaps, you know, to agree with you. I've traveled the region. My sort of perhaps hidden talent is I've been learning Spanish for years and years, so I love going to that part of the world and, you know, unleashing my year of new words.
Your fun galore Spanish.
I'll save everyone here. But if you were to put a gun to my head, being South African, a gun has been put to my head, and said you've got to go somewhere, Argentina would be right at the top of my list, because culturally, you know, there's something that resonates, and perhaps it's this industrial, political and economic scarring
it's a bit of tear gas is still in the room and resilience to get through.
Yeah. And you know, maybe there's also, you know, something that sits well too, or sits badly, but we understand it, is the sense of we should be punching above this weight.
We should be doing better.
We should be doing better. And so you can sit, you know, with Argentinians and have this conversation about, well, you know, this is what's just around the corner.
Yeah.
And so that really resonates.
Yeah.
But on this trip, I wasn't in Argentina.
Let me just, before we run to others, just say one more thing. So I went to La Boca, where the soccer come from.
Beautiful,
and you realize there's a long story. It's a Latin culture.
Yeah.
And South America is marked by this phenomenon. And you know the story of the Pope? Do you know the story of the Pope?
No, you're going to tell me.
Extraordinary story. The Spanish and the Portuguese were arguing about their colonial project in Latin America. The Pope took a ruler. He said the east is Portugal,
yes.
West is Spanish.
Yeah.
So Brazil is Portuguese, the rest is Spanish.
Yeah, this famous or infamous line. I do know what the Pope did, Sure. Yeah, so on this trip, no Argentina, but a couple of places that was the first time for me. Peru, wow, extraordinary. Infrastructure that works, gorgeous climate, in industries that matter in the conversations we're having right now, in particular mining, and Well, we can't go to Peru and not talk about the food. So, some lovely touristy things, but some real, economic gravity that matters. Small economies, small population, but it's getting on.
Is it Peru a regional exception? Is it a bit of a story?
But I do think it's a bit of a story regionally. And, then the place that has to stand out, in our last conversation, we were talking about mid-sized powers. And we might want to put Peru there right at the bottom of the list. Chile certainly belongs in that bucket. Brazil without question. And then Mexico. Getting on with the business of being a mid-income economy. This is a large population.
Sure.
This is growing quickly. It's industrializing in an impressive way.
But fraught with two strategic problems, right? Crime and the drug story, and then the threat of the USA cutting off its water. Tell me what your thoughts were, having done all that travel and been there a lot. Why does Latin America not punch at a higher level, just the point you were making? What do you think holds it back?
Again and again, we can go to the origin of the story, which is the resource story. And historically then, you find the double curses. First the resource curse, and then the second, not a curse, but a disease, but it belongs in that bucket, called Dutch disease. And you're likely to see this play out right now in this environment, that each time commodity prices boom, there's a bit of a windfall, and we can stop worrying about the important things that really need to happen. And so you're given respite. You're allowed to
borrow money, invest in luxury projects.
And so, the origin of the story is the gun, germs and steel, the Jared Diamond stuff of the Spanish, the Brazilians, the Portuguese headed off to Brazil, the rest of LATAM, and they're in pursuit of resources. They discover these resources, and it's all extractive to the center.
Exploited.
So it's how do we get the biggest bang for our buck without really having to be serious about industrializing these places.
I want to talk about the devastation of the Spanish and Portuguese colonization.
Yeah.
In Argentina, the population was wiped out either through violence or through disease. But it really was pretty brutal and horrific. And the amount of wealth taken out of those Central American countries, Aztec and so on, was extraordinary. I remember reading that one of these British admirals, I forget which one, they captured a Spanish fleet, and that added a third to Britain's GDP. That's how much gold and silver was extracted. Is it a kind of a European extension, do you think, South America?
You mean culturally? Absolutely. So, if you go to any of the big centers, you'll find things that resonate, whether it's architecture, you made reference to that, custom and tradition, the way we greet each other, the way that,
And ballet and opera, European traditions.
You're going to find that in abundance.
So do you think in the 20-year outlook, they will have matured beyond the coups and the short generals and all of that kind of stuff that's so earmarked Latin American political history?
Short answer, no. And the reason why I'm quick with the no is because of this commodity curse. And they're not big enough to be able to sort of call their shot, so they must play in these mid-ranks. And I'm not sure things have ever gotten serious enough that they say, right, we've got to get on with fixing the things that matter, and where am I going to go with that? Institutional strength.
Sure.
And so you've got this flip-flopping constantly between left, right,
and right, and populists and the military. In the military, because of the Spanish, have played the church and the military. Those have been the two key institutions in South America. Catholic Church.
And neither are going away.
And the Catholic Church is declining relatively because of the new sort of Protestantism, which is becoming quite popular.
Not to the Latin America I went to.
Not to the one you went to, well, fair enough. But those were the two shaping institutions. And then lots of quarrels over different borders and so on. And what I was saying to you earlier is that it's a pity no one stood up or was able, Simon Bolivar, one of those people, to be able to stand up and say these united Latin American states,
That
like the US
yeah.
did, consolidated, like Europe has tried to consolidate.
Absolutely.
Them. And I think it's missing a lot of energy because it's hard to get things done.
Yeah, and that was his big endeavor, to try and bring them all together. And of course, none of that was to be. There's another sort of quieter challenge that the region faces, and it's the geography. And I don't mean by that commodities. I mean the ability to put in infrastructure that connects and integrates. The great creator, the great creator gifted Europe and said to Europe, I'm giving you
Fertile
highways
plains,
for free.
Big rivers, get on with it.
So Europe got highways for free.
Yeah.
The US is big and flat. So
have you ever noticed, though, that both continents, North and South America, both have a mountain range?
Yeah.
The Andes and so on.
Yeah.
Both have a massive river, the Mississippi and the Amazon. And yet I would argue culturally, Latin America partly has not developed because it was not Protestant. Whereas Americans were much harder working, much more individualistic. Latin America, much more communal, much more emotional.
And that takes us then in another direction in our conversation about fate, luck and choice, is the colonizers brought you, religion and
disease.
And disease.
Robbed the bank.
Excavated, extracted, to their benefit, core periphery type stuff. Andre Gunder Frank is prolific on this point. But that then becomes the installed institutions, and one of those institutions is the religion that you are. Pretty
conservative and religious in some ways, like South Africa, which is also in some ways very religious country and conservative. Let's ask about our relationship with it. It's this big pear-shaped upside down. It's got very varying climates. We've got much more similar climates here. But what should our strategic relationship be with Latin America? Why should we go see?
Well, I think here we're losing an opportunity. And when we were talking about this Southeast Asia this time last year, what are the lessons that we can learn from economies that come from tortured political pasts, are somehow able to leap that chasm and now get on with things in impressive ways. Vietnam being my case in point, but we've also spoken about Philippines, Indonesia, Malaysia.
And you think they're a step behind that?
I think Latin America is a step behind this. I think that they are still trapped in the trauma.
And if you compare Latin America to Africa, would you say we're a step behind Latin America, broadly speaking?
I would sequence it that way, yes. I would sequence it that way. And so, when you say we, what can South Africa do? There are potentially very strong partners. We understand each other culturally, we get it industrially. We've got things that you want, you've got things that we want. And how do we
So should our companies go?
Most definitely our companies should go. They should be going and having a good look.
Well, they have, of course. Tony Leon was our ambassador in Argentina.
Sure.
We've had some interactions with him. We flew directly for a long time from Cape Town to Buenos Aires.
And there is part of the lost story is,
we didn't build on that.
Where's the plane link? Why only to Brazil? Why not to the rest of the region?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Fantastic discussion. Look forward to seeing you next time. Please subscribe, Fate, Luck and Choice. Thank you for joining us.